Well, good evening. We are honored, excited to enter into part 3 of our discussion of A Sojourner's Truth, Choosing Freedom and Courage in a Divided World. Tonight, we are talking about the wilderness. I am Natasha Sistrunk Robinson. I'm the visionary founder of Leadership Links Incorporated. I'm also the president of T3 Leadership Solutions and just happen to be the author of the book for this month's book discussion. I want to thank you again so much for joining us and spending time with us this evening, for those of you that are joining us live and those that will be joining us throughout the coming days, weeks, and months ahead as we continue these important conversations for your leadership, growth, character, and spiritual development. We want to thank our event series partner, our InterVarsity Press. InterVarsity is doing a giveaway this week. Many of you that have registered for this event, you've received your giveaway link and information in advance. But if you have not, and you have not yet entered the giveaway, you have a minute. We want to give you some time to do that. So we're going to share the link for you both in the chat box and also in the comment section of Facebook to give you a chance to enter these two resources. This week's giveaway includes the new release, Healing Racial Trauma by author Sheila Wise Rowe. And so we encourage you to enter that, but also just go ahead and share the video on your Facebook, if you're on Facebook Live now, to invite other people into the conversation, or another social media platform. Those are some ways that you can enter the giveaway on this evening and qualify to receive these two books and some other resources we can send your way. Leadership Links Incorporated is hosting our event tonight. It's a 501c3 nonprofit that I founded with some friends who are very intentional in raising up the next generation of leaders. And we want to do that holistically by providing leadership education that facilitates character development, spiritual development, and also positively impacts people's lives. And so that's the work that we do here through Leadership Links. We start at 6th grade, and we have a multi-ethnic, multi-generational network of leaders. That's what the N in our core values, N, stands for. So we do that through love, inspiration, network, knowledge, and service. And we thank you for joining us this evening and linking up with us. I want to take a minute to share our short introduction video, so you can just see some of the work that we do, particularly with our young people, but you can also see the diverse group of people that continue to invest in the lives of these young people that we have the pleasure and privilege of supporting.
In August of 2015, Leadership Links established itself as a nonprofit organization from what began as a yearning desire to encourage, equip, and mentor both aspiring and practicing leaders would flourish into community building, mentorship, and spiritual enrichment. Driven by its mission to offer leadership education that facilitates impactful living, character, and spiritual development, Leadership Links guides others in developing and refining their best selves.
It's important for her to be around like-minded individuals where she can feel free to express herself and not feel uncomfortable about being a leader. And I just appreciate everything that this program has done for my daughter.
Dedicated to connecting people with purpose, Leadership Links delivers leadership training, conducts summer programs, hosts networking events, and establishes impactful mentoring relationships to slingshot people towards their goals. Making an impact on those around you is inevitable, especially when giving the right combination of love, inspiration, a strong network, knowledge, and a heart to serve. This is who we are. It's what we do. It's why we exist.
With inspiration, Leadership Links taught me how to be confident and when I take a different path than other people. And I actually found out that I inspire others when I go my own way in life. I love to volunteer in my community, and Leadership Links has helped me and connected me to other volunteer services.
We believe that this was ordained by God. We are in partnership with some wonderful people who really have a passion and a thirst to see the youth in our community reach their dreams, walk in their purpose, and to really grow and to fulfill their potential.
Here we're able to express ourselves freely in the no judgment zone. We're able to share ideas and be able to bounce ideas off of one another to not only make ourselves succeed, but others as well.
Grounded by desire to serve, its founding board members are all military veterans who find that service is just as important, in or out of uniform.
It's about all of us pushing ourselves to give our very best of what all of us have to offer to make our children better and to help their dreams to come true.
God is the one who created us in his image and for a purpose. And in knowing him, our Links leaders can walk in purpose and learn how to love others well.
Sometimes it appears that there are plenty of reasons to feel doubtful about humanity, but there is a light. There are people devoted to helping others, teaching others, and believing in others. Be a part of the good going on in the world. Join the network. Provide support. Lend your time. Change a life. Link up.
So thank you for linking it up with us. And now I have the honor and privilege of introducing my friend, Shane Blackshear, podcaster and host of Seminary Dropout. He is also the co-host of the podcast On Ramp, a member of the pastoral team of Austin Mustard Seed. He's been published on sites such as churchleaders.com and Missio Alliance, where we also do some mutual work. Shane lives with his wife, Kate, and their two children, Margaret and Amos, in Austin, Texas. Shane, my friend, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I haven't. So we've been friends. How long has it been now?
I don't know. I was thinking today, I think the first time I had you on my podcast was before you had written anything, even
Right.
your mentoring books. So it's been a few years now.
Yeah, because Mentor for Life published in 2016. So
Yeah.
we were. So that, I mean, golly. So that's a good
What
way.
old friends.
I like to. I joke sometimes. I was thinking about my informal introduction. I was like, we have a pretty tight relationship because I've eaten off your plate in front of your wife. That was a couple of conferences ago at Missio Alliance where you were having that fried chicken and waffles. I remember.
Oh,
that.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Kate wasn't with me on that one. I think that was one of our pastoral people, but yeah. Totally. Yeah. We had a good time that conference.
Yeah, my husband calls us some of us professional conference goers. I'm like, that's our work, man. That's our work.
That's right. I love it.
We're talking about the wilderness tonight.
Yeah, I am so excited to get to dig into this with you. It's funny. So this section that we're covering is about wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking the concept of wilderness is really just antithetical to the American way of life, right?
Yep.
Hard times, lament, some sadness, some tears. We don't like to talk about that.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting. So, because we have a few people joining us tonight, and I guess one thing I want to ask, because it's good to know kind of where people are, because I've been studying the wilderness, and not just studying. I've experienced multiple wilderness experiences in my life, which I shared throughout the book. But everything's not in the book, right? But I think also to your point about this whole idea of wilderness kind of being kind of anti-American, because we're about dreaming and getting better all the time. And so we don't really know what to do with it. And really, right now, we are in a wilderness, with this pandemic that's going on, and we're asking people to do things that are very unnatural and I think unhuman, even though it's required of us and it's important for us to be safe. But I want to ask people, the few that are joining us here on Zoom, and if there's people on Facebook, if Durante could feed those to us as well. Just kind of, where are you in this wilderness experience? And why is the conversation we're having, first of all, where you're joining us from, that's important. We can see your name, where you're joining us from, but where are you in this wilderness experience? And why is it important for you to join in this conversation tonight? I think that's probably good to know where people come. You can put that in the chat box, and if I see some, I will share some here. But go ahead, Shane, you were making some good points about this just kind of being different.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I was thinking, Natasha, is there was so much of specifically this section of the book that was so like unbelievably timely with the things that we're going through. And even just thinking about the concept of wilderness, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know many people who aren't having a somewhat difficult time right now. You know, we're in the middle of this pandemic, so across the board, and that makes that makes hardships, and that makes inequities that already existed, it makes them harder. It makes them more pronounced, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like in some way, almost all of us are going through some sort of wilderness right now.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and to your point, I think it. I always, I was a competitive athlete, as a young person. And so I always, tell my daughter sometimes, I say, you fight how you train, you fight how you train. And that's, something I learned in the military. But even before that, it's like you win in large part based on how well you practice. Right. And so if you're training for something and preparing for it, you have a better chance of coming out on top. And I think the challenge we're facing now, just not systemically, but also just individually, and even as an American church, that we haven't really trained for this, right? The way that we've entered into relationship with people, or sometimes community with people, or the ways that we do church, the way we think about work, the way that we think about priority and value, and equity and pay, these type things. We just haven't done a really good job. And so a lot of people have come into this place of wilderness really at a loss for not just, they can't even see to the other side of it, not even knowing, how do I live through this? And I think that's a challenging thing we're dealing with right now. And why, you can read something like this book and say, oh, it's so timely, even though I wrote it, 3 years ago and it published 2 years ago, because these issues that I raise here are not new issues. But I think some people, depending on your social location or your class or your race, or your ethnicity, you're constantly confronted with things that not everyone who have those same challenges are confronted with. And so I think some people, they're confronting some of these things for a first time, and other people, they've conditioned themselves to go through hard things.
Yeah, that's so good, Natasha. You had this, and it's a great segue, because you had this great quote in the first chapter of that section. It's about anger. And you had this great quote, and just forgive me, apologies in advance if I get the name wrong, but Hitendra Wadhwa?
Yeah, I pronounced it incorrectly too.
Okay, good. Well, she had this fantastic quote. She said, great leaders often have a strong capacity to experience anger. It wakes them up. It makes them pay attention to what's wrong in their environment or in themselves. Yeah. Without anger, they would not have the awesomeness or the drive to fix what's wrong.
Yeah.
Whoa. And you talked about, I love how you talked about, there's so many people now who are just waking up in the wake of George Floyd's death. They are, or murder, I should say more accurately. They're just kind of waking up to what's been going on around them, the racial inequalities and injustices. And then there are people who have been fighting that fight for as long as they can remember. There are also people of color who have not had a choice to engage or not engage. That's life for them. And so I don't know, I'm curious to hear from you. How do we harness that anger in good ways? One of the questions that you actually had in the end of this chapter was, what's the proper place for anger? How can we respond in anger and not sin?
Yeah, that's good. For me personally, because I was just thinking about this today, actually, in the car. We had a long car ride home. And so you're reading things and you're processing things. And so one of the things I was thinking about today when I was riding home is that I've been discipled, taught intellectually, philosophically in the ways of Martin Luther King. But I've been trained in some ways in the ways of Malcolm X, right? And I think both are valid. I do. I think both are valid. I don't think either of them are wrong, because even when you look at Malcolm X, like, he was not a violent man. He was a man that said, I'm going to respond in self-defense if you come to harm, with the intent of harming me, my family, or someone I love. And if he was of another complexion, we would say that's good. That's what a man should do. Right. and so I think, it's important to remember that. But I want to go back to that quote for Hatandra, because when I think about that inspiration, that motivation, for me, it's very important that I am anchored, and I am focused, and I'm intentional in how I respond to things, that whatever I say or do, or whatever work that I produce, that is moving us forward, right? That I'm carrying the torch, that I am standing on the shoulders of giants, as the quote said, of people that have come before me. And I'm not doing anything to tear down or harm the work that they've already done. And so when I think about a week like this week, where we just lost Reverend C.T. Vivian, we just lost John Lewis, like people like them, men and women like them, are the type of people I look to that say, okay, well, how did they respond, to violence? How did they respond to injustice? How did they respond to inequity? How did they respond to racism and white supremacy? And those are the things that kind of anchor me when I'm tempted to respond in my emotions. And I remember, and I quote him in the book, I forget what chapter it is, but Reverend C.T. Vivian, I had a privilege of meeting him a few years ago at a conference and spending time with him, and him saying to us in a small group, like, it is in the action that you find out who you are. Right?
Yeah.
So anybody can tweet, anybody can post, anybody can do it for the gram, right? Anybody can do it for a moment. But if you're really going to be a person that stands for what's right, if you're going to be a person that is anti-racist, if you're going to be a person that is going to work to either reform or tear down systems that are inequitable, or build new systems, then those are not one moment. It is what you do moment after moment after moment. It is consistency and the persistence and the intentionality of the work.
That is so good, which, as an aside, it was this chapter where you quoted Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian, and I mean, talk about relevant. He was laid to rest like hours ago today.
Yep.
Yeah. What an amazing man. And I think you really bring up a good point of, sure, like, we've got to figure out what this looks like in our context, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because we have these amazing people that went before us that showed us the way.
Right.
Yeah. So getting back to that, the action and the anger that motivates the action. I saw on, I think it was on Instagram, a Black man had posted this thing, and he said, sometimes I wonder if we have allies at all. And he had this screenshot of a white person who had, on the day where everybody blacked out their thing, their Instagram, that had a screenshot of that. This white person had posted it. The same white person, like a couple days later, had a picture of them with their MAGA hats and Trump memorabilia or whatever. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, that is such a great, like, microcosm of what we think that, whatever you want to call it, allyship or just pursuing racial justice. We think that it's just like signing our name onto something and saying, like, yeah, that's great. But no, like, actually it requires something of us, right?
Yeah.
And the same way that following Jesus requires something from us. It's not just we get to pray a prayer and then that's it. There is an allegiance that's required. It's embodied, right? It's not just signing on to something. This is all embodied.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. And I'm gonna throw this question to you, because, a lot of, I mean, like you said, we've been friends for a long time, and have, you know, had some good conversations and partnered in some work, but also watching each other's work. And I have a fairly diverse group of friends and colleagues and coworkers, you know, in different career fields. And I think what is happening in this image that you gave us is really important, because sometimes I think the reason why it's interesting to you is that you've done some work to understand the layers of the tension of the first post versus the second post, right? And I don't think everyone's at different parts of their journey, so not everyone has done that work. And so one thing I want to ask you about your journey to becoming, you know, an anti-racist, and what this current crisis looks like to you as a white man, and what ways did you feel that you can encourage or educate, that's one of our missional statements, white people who are just kind of on different parts of this journey, but trying to figure it out about becoming anti-racist or pursuing justice, and looking at this wilderness of racism in light of the injustices that the pandemic of coronavirus is exposing in our land?
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good question. Well, first off, I'm no expert. But as far as my own, you asked about my own journey.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, I try to track that back. Like, how did I get here? That I think that came about from you mentioned my podcast, Seminary Dropout. I started interviewing people. In fact, like Drew Hart was someone that I also interviewed him before he wrote his first book.
Yep.
And man, he helped me so much just understand things. And I started reading his blog, and then, you know, other people as well, you know, when Christina Cleveland wrote Disunity in Christ. And I was reading these books by people of color and Black folks, and they were opening my eyes, you know, like I can't describe it any other way than seeing the light, right? Like woke is a really apt word, because that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Not that I would say I'm woke, I've arrived, but you do feel that way when you see, you know, all these systems that have been in place that you weren't taught about in school, and then it becomes a very logical response to act when you learn those things, right? Like, you know, I grew up in a real conservative environment where it was kind of like, boy, those like crazy, you know, kind of liberal yahoos out there. But the thing is, when you see reality for what it is,
yeah,
speaking out against racial injustice doesn't feel radical. It feels like the logical thing to do in the face of that, right?
Right.
So yeah, and so you asked, you know, how do we educate more white folks? You know, it's got to come through just the hard work of having conversations with people, and like you said, like what I say on social media and, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that is fine, but that's really not action, right? Like, can I have the conversation with, you know, my racist relative around the Thanksgiving table?
Yeah.
That's something different. And
Right.
and that's hard, because I can get angry and just yell expletives at them, and that might even like make me feel a little bit righteous.
Right.
But it doesn't change anyone. That doesn't do anything. And in fact, I'm probably confirming some notions that they have about people like me that believe that racial injustice is real, right?
Right.
So that's the messy work. That's not fun. That's not and not sexy. You know what I mean? Like, that's getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it's two things, right? And so if I would think about like two groups or two places or two communities that you spend a lot of time with, I would say that would be work and it would be family. Not even church when you start adding the hours up, right? You probably spend the most time, most of us, at work, and then the rest of that time with family. And then church is probably like a third or fourth or fifth if you go to church at all. And so when you think about those two places, it's like show up there. And what I've seen sometimes, not often, is with some white people, I think, that are well intentioned, when they start to become knowledgeable about some of these things or educated about some of these things. Yes, you could do the easy thing of the social media thing. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying you can't only do that. Or another thing I see, and you can probably speak to this too, is that they'll start removing themselves from them places. Well, I can't deal with them. I can't deal with those people. It's like, no, these your people. Right, like
Right.
this is your work. This is your, if I were to use biblical language, this is your harvest. Like, this is your mission field. And so, like, your family is your business. Like, your workplace is your business. And so these are places where we can, it's easy to eject ourselves from the conversation or from the work, because and these are the most difficult relationships sometimes to have. And these are the relationships that are going to cost us things. It's like the family is the place to have the conversation. The workplace is the place to have the conversation. Because guess what? These are people you're committed to in some way for long term. And this work, as you know, and I know, is not something you finish. It's just something you continue, and hopefully you get better at, and you get wiser at, and you get deeper at, and you can have a greater impact in it. But it's never done, right? Until Jesus comes home, like, the work is never done. And so you want to be doing that work with people you're going to be in relationship with for some, extended period of time. And so one question I want to ask, and kind of, so I asked you kind of personally for you, but what is one responsible way you think that white people can use their voices and their platforms and their privilege and their money to act in response to racial justice? Because that's one of the things I'm talking about systemically. This wilderness in the book is one of the wildernesses I'm talking about, and something we're dealing with now.
Yeah. So yeah, can I tell you one that I haven't, that I'm in the middle of, haven't figured out?
Yeah.
So for us in the neighborhood we live in, our daughter went to kindergarten for the first, it was her first year of public school is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
This year. And because of the demographic makeup of our neighborhood, she was the only white girl in her class, only white kid in her class. And in her school, or elementary school, it's about 6% white. So that's the makeup. And we were, it wasn't like we were like, we're going to move into this neighborhood and, be missionaries in this school. It wasn't like that, but it was like, here's the context we find ourselves in. We're not going to we're not going to send our kids somewhere else. We're going to live and invest and love in this neighborhood. And knowing a little bit about kind of the inequalities in majority white public schools and schools with children of color. And I went this last year, I went and had lunch with my daughter at school, and was really heartbroken at some of the ways I was seeing some of the kids treated by teachers and staff there. Mm-hmm. And so this story doesn't have a nice, neat ending. I had set up a meeting with the principal, but before that date happened is when COVID hit, and it was like, they weren't going to go back to school anyway. And so right. I'll be doing that when school starts again, if it starts again. Yeah. But I am very, very worried about, especially since this pandemic and all the talk I hear about, I see and hear from my white friends about homeschooling their kids now. And I'm very, very worried about the kids who are going to be left behind in those public schools. Yeah. So you asked, like, what are something white people could do? Not removing your kids and putting them in situations where they will always be the majority. Yeah. And that's, to some white people, that is crazy talk. Like, because we have effectively made the signs of success in this country being able to, if you're white, send your kid to a school where there's only white kids. Like, we most don't do that on purpose, but that is effectively what we've done. If you're successful, you'll be able to segregate your kids from people that don't look like them. And so being very aware of that dynamic, that system that's in place, and then figuring out how to resist it.
It's so many things there, because so if I respond to one piece of that, is interesting, because even with our work that we do at Leadership Links, one of the things we've done consistently is offer summer leadership programs and mentoring programs for middle and high school girls. We've done that for the last 4 years. We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary. And in doing that, most of the girls that participate are African American. Now, when I tell you personally, I've been out and asked communities where there are a lot of white kids and a lot of white families, right? To share about our program, to talk about our program, to talk about our organization and our work. And I can count on one hand in the last 4 years, the number of white kids that have enrolled in any of our programming. And people can ask, well, what is that about? When you look at the, the quality of the program, the caliber of the people that's running it. And I can look around, because to your point, there's just not there's a discomfort in putting the child in an environment where they're not the majority. And so that's something that we've seen just in the work that we do here. And so it's very interesting. And then on the flip side, they have people say to us, oh, well, it looks like it's just for Black kids. I'm like, well, those are kids who show up. Right. Yeah. And they're getting great quality leadership education and mentorship. And it's not, it's not anything other than that. And so it's very interesting. So you are correct. I see that just here, but I've seen it other places too. My daughter, so flip side of this, my daughter's in private school. She's been in private school since first grade. And I also, the church that we were in, that we came from before we moved here, was a multi-ethnic church. And so several of the people in that church and the leadership has bought into the philosophy of the Community Development Association, which
CCDA.
Community, what I'm missing a C.
Christian
Community Development Association, CCDA, which that's the last time we saw each other. That's right. What's that, in the fall, last fall?
Yeah, things like October or something, yeah.
Right. So one of the things, that they are ascribed to is that whole relocation. And this is a debate I have all the time with my white friends that, do that sometimes, is that, that your child, unfortunately, a lot of times they could get a subpar education and probably be okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And I'm not telling anyone, what choices to make about their own kids, but I'm talking about the dynamics, right? And what it means and what it looks like to live in a racialized society. Like my daughter doesn't have that luxury of having a subpar education, right? And being okay. But she has different privileges. Like she has privileges that both of her parents are veterans and both of her parents are college graduates, and both of her parents are college graduates from schools that provide careers and not just jobs. And so she has a whole lot of other privileges. But your average, your normal African-American Latino kid, they just become a number in a system like that. And so I'm thankful for you for, taking the initiative to have a conversation with the principal and head of school. Because again, part of the system is like, what expectations do we have of the kids, and how are we responding to the kids about what they could be, or are we responding to kids to how we perceive them? Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't know how much to get into this, but it's like, I know that my daughter actually doesn't get treated that way at school. It's only these Black and brown kids.
Yep.
And the thing is, a lot of them, the parents of those kids love those kids. They're hardworking people, but most of them are disenfranchised, and they're not able to advocate for their own kids. I know just statistically, some of their parents are undocumented. They're afraid to speak up in any way.
Yeah.
And so who's going to speak up for them?
Right.
You
Right.
know?
So you've given us an example of how to use your voice, how to be attentive to what's going on around you, how to be intentional in the type of environments you put yourselves in, how to be intentional in being in environments where maybe you're not the majority or you're not in charge, and doing that for yourself, but also doing it for your kids. That's a lot. Okay, that's a lot of good stuff there. That's plenty. That's plenty of education and opportunity.
Okay,
There.
good. Yeah. So listen, I want to know
Yes.
I want to know more about your trip to Rwanda that you took.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like Rwanda has so much to teach us as Americans about what you do with your past that's not great.
Right. Yeah, and I think, the interesting thing about it, there's a lot of interesting things about it. So one of the interesting things is that for this book contract, I had 9 months to write this book. And I know I needed that time because of what was going on in my life and what I thought the book was going to require of me, and I was right. And so by the time I was scheduled to go to Rwanda, I was about halfway through writing the book. And on one hand, writing the book was like therapy, but on the other hand, it was just emotionally, spiritually draining. Like I was empty. Like I just did not have anything more to give. And so I put the book down for probably a month, maybe even 2 months, somewhere between there. And that was right around the time I went to Rwanda, which is the first time I went to the continent of Africa. And so prior to that, I knew about the Rwanda genocide, the 1994 genocide. I knew about that. I read the book Left to Tell. I remember like seeing some news stories over the time. I remember watching Hotel Rwanda. And so there were all these things that I knew about the genocide. And then you get there, and the genocide, or the reality of the genocide, something can hover over you like a dark cloud in a very bad way, and you're like, oh, this storm is coming, or what? Like the commercials or the cartoons you see, and the cloud just following the person around, and it's just like, isn't it that isn't that one of Charlie Brown's where the cloud just followed the kid around and like raining on him all the time?
Right.
So you can have something bad happen. It feels like that. And I think that's a lot of what shame and guilt feels and looks like. I think there's a good visual of it. But the reality of the genocide is there, it's very present, it's in your face and your face. And I understand that's the way it is when you go to Germany as well. But it's not in a way that's shame and guilt. It's in a way that this is what happened, and we're going to tell the truth about what happened, because we don't want to do this again. And this was not their first genocide. I believe they had one about 30, 40 years prior, like 1950 something, because I bought a couple of books about that when I was there. I haven't read them yet. But I knew this was not their first genocide. It's our first one that we knew about. And I forget how old I was, but I know I had not graduated high school yet. And so even then, as a young person, I wasn't as engaged globally. But I think the issue is that you had countries like ours and other countries that knew what was happening, what was going on, and they didn't engage either. And again, partially because look at these people, right? Like there, a lot of our global policy is really about money and power. And so if these people are killing each other and it's not impacting our economic situation, then sometimes, unfortunately, whether we like to say that or not, we kind of turn our blind eye, we don't look away. And so there was a lot of that happening in the world. But then also the reality of these people were living together, and the French government is what came in and kind of strategically turned these the Hutu and the Tutsi people against each other and start determining the ways. We have history of this not only in our country but also in Germany and before that of distinguishing people by their height or the shape of their nose. So it's not even skin color at this point. It's just really, again, once you become knowledgeable about it, like, this is ridiculous. But literally, they were murdering each other because of that. Because one of the tribes was getting power and positions in government, and because that's how the French wanted, and then the other one, they were selling them machetes. And so you have an environment that's ripe for violence because of the inequity and because of the classism and because of the racial divisions that were perpetuated by other people that came into their community, into their country. And so that was kind of the base of it that I learned in going there. And you have so many memorials, so many, earlier in this book, I write about the importance of artifacts and monuments and the stories that we tell and the history that we tell, how we tell that history. And so there were so many memorials. I think we went to 3 when I was there, but there were so many others. And everyone telling about the atrocity of it, right? That we were not our best selves here. And not only did we cause the problem, that we were the ones to fix it. And so they had these Greco courts where you had survivors of the victims confronting the murderers. And if the murderers, and we saw this happen in South Africa as well, where if the murderers told the truth, then the community decided to, offer forgiveness and how to deal with them. But then if they didn't, there was other justice efforts and consequences to that. But the thing is that the people were empowered to make those decisions, and the people that were guilty were encouraged and supported in telling the truth about themselves, so they could, the word we would use as Christians, so they could repent, right? That they could, it's not just, I'm sorry that I don't want to do this again. And can you forgive me for the harm that I've done? And so a lot of that work that I saw, the truth telling, the coming together, so they don't even refer to themselves as their tribe anymore. They still, they say we are Rwandans. So we are one, and not just in name and just in brand, that we are one people. We are together in this. There's a slogan there, never again, never forget. And so again, it's like you saying that you're acknowledging first that something happened. It's not like forget it and get over it. Why are we still talking about that? It's like, no, something horrible happened. And that's the whole, if we, again, looking at our Christian understanding of things, that you have to confess your sin, right? And that's a prerequisite for repentance, which is to change your behavior, go another direction, go another way. And so they say, never again. We know what we did. It was wrong. We're not hiding it. We're not covering it up. We're not minimalizing it. We're not gonna let shame and guilt prevent us from addressing this the right way. We're going to confront it. We're going to name it. We're going to address it. And then we're not going to allow ourselves to do this as a people, to ourselves, but also to each other. We're not going to do this again. And so it's just very encouraging, because it shows up in everywhere. I mean, from their political policy of we saw just how they have people engaged. Everyone's working. Everyone's doing some kind of work and getting paid for something, even if it's a street sweeper. They take pride in their country. And so that's a very intentional thing. That's what the government is doing. But also, the education system. So the ministry that we were there with was Africa New Life. And Africa New Life, they do a lot of things, but one of the things they do is they have a lot of schools all throughout the country. And one of the schools, we visited a couple of schools, but one of the schools we visited was a boarding school where you had Rwandans from the elite group. You have kids from like politicians going to school with very impoverished kids from villages that barely have running water, right? They're going to boarding school together. Right. So it's not just that this is a boarding school for the privileged kids. And so this idea that the classism, and the equity of education is going to not cause, the equity of education is going to level the playing field to some degree, because not only are they getting the same quality education, but they're also connected to each other in such a way that when these kids, if they pursue political careers, now they're not doing it absent of the reality of the people that they're actually going to be serving. So there's just so many beautiful ways I saw redemption happening and taking place there. And I think I agree with you that we as Americans can learn a lot from them. But the pride is that we only learn for certain people and for certain things. And it's not always about making us better in character or morality. It's about making us more powerful and more wealthy.
Yeah, that's so good, Natasha. You had this great statement in that chapter, on the chapter on death. You said, you're talking about Rwanda, and you said, because they remember and tell the truth, Rwandans are not owned or defined by the single narrative of the history of genocide in their country.
Yeah.
The redemptive story will be defined by how they continually come together and rebuild in light of that history. And I think when you contrast that to where we are in America, and, you know, anytime you try to talk about slavery or Jim Crow or what, you convict leasing, any of it, you know, somebody comes out of the woodwork and says, why are you talking about that? Why are you being divisive? And there's this kind of idea, there's this myth, if we can just kind of bury that, then things will be better. But it doesn't work that way. And Rwanda has done like the opposite and said, no, we're going to remember this. We're going to put up, you know, memorials, and we're going to educate people. And because we tell the truth, we won't be defined by that terrible thing that happened. It's this counterintuitive thing where it says, no, actually, if we don't try to bury it, we can do something different. We can be known for something else. And I think you mentioned Germany. From what I understand, they also do a very good job of this.
Yeah.
Look, they don't have any statues to Nazi soldiers in Germany. Come on.
No, sir. No, sir. Yeah, again, once you become aware and educated about some of these things, it's almost bizarre when you look at kind of what we do and the pride that we have of saying how great of a country we are, right? Not that we don't love the country, but it's like there's a lack of humility in saying, and what, you know, in naming our sin, our corporate sin, which is a biblical principle as well, but also saying, in what ways have we failed humanity, and what ways have we failed our own citizens, in some regards, and in many regards, I would say. And how can we correct that? So, you know, this is not just about Black people, right? This is about Indigenous people and how they have been removed out of sight, out of mind. Like most people that can't even name an Indigenous person that they know, because they have been isolated to a place where they're out of sight, out of mind. So we don't even think about, you know, those communities, and the injustice and the violence that has been imposed upon, you know, those communities. You know, we don't have friends, you know, that are Japanese Americans, so we don't know about the Japanese internment camps, right, and how that affected families and generations, and people who, you know, came here and were loyal and had wealth, and now, you know, didn't have any, right? We don't know about the broken immigration system, and we don't know friends that are in the Latinx community or Hispanic community, or and they'll tell you how they have tried to get their paperwork or, you know, become citizens, and knowing that we just have a broken immigration system, that some people, there is no path for them, right? And the first time that I really started to understand that was when I read again one of IVP books, Welcoming a Stranger, but also because I have because I read other things too, and you know, and I visited, you know, certain museums, and you know, got some understanding of the history that you know, some people are the type of immigrants that Americans want, and some people are the type of immigrants that Americans don't want, and that changes from year to year, and it changes depending on who's in political power, and again, what's in the best interest of America. But it's not, you know, no one's talking about building a border on the north.
That's right.
right. And so there's some issues there that we have to talk about. And so I think that we just have to get, it's not just an empathy. I want to constantly go back to, like, when I think about our mission here of leadership and education, that if we really want to do better, like, we have to become more knowledgeable, which is one of our core values as well, about what actually is going on, and not just taking at face value what's been told to us. Because if we're relying on the education we got in grade school, I could tell you that's all sorts of incomplete at best, wrong at worst, right? Like, there's no reason at all we should still be celebrating Columbus Day in 2020, right? There's no reason for that. Like, when you actually read some of his journals, it is, it's horrible.
Yeah. And I think too, Natasha, that really shows how we, you talked about how we're such like a prideful country, like we're proud of the country, and we indoctrinate ourselves so young in this country to believe in American exceptionalism that is really like, it's just a nationalism, and to the point that, like, I mean, even if someone didn't know the terrible, terrible things that Christopher Columbus did, it's like, really, Columbus Day means that much to you? I mean, come on, like you're canceling the 4th of July or something. It's like just because it's been this way forever, you think it needs to be because America,
Yeah. And I think if we were to reflect back to our last conversation in the last section of the book about history, right? And so, even the ways we compartmentalize history is like, okay, so what history is important for us to know? I think that's a really good question. What history is important for us to know? Because we segregate and say, okay, Black history. Well, Black history is American history. Right. And so we need to know that, because if we don't know that, if we don't understand what we consider as accurate history or normative history, or the history that we got in grade school, we don't understand the violence and harm that has caused, until we understand how those policies and those practices have impacted people that are not in power, that don't have the money, don't have the access or opportunities or education, or just, quite frankly, are not white and male, right? And so we have to learn the history and hear some of these stories, so we can see kind of what that actually looked like, not just on paper, but in practice.
Yeah. And so much of it is, part of it is being taught the wrong thing. Like, I can very clearly remember an elementary school teacher telling me that the Civil War was about states' rights.
Right.
And which is, there's some people that will still swear to that today, that it was. And I find that interesting at a time when our president is sending federal troops into states against their wishes. That some of the people that would support that would probably still say that Civil War was about states' rights. Anyway, I digress.
Right.
But so it's about what we were taught wrong, but it's also what we were just never taught. Like,
right.
It was really interesting. I don't know if it had to do with, HBO's show, The Watchmen, that came out, had a scene with the Tulsa massacre.
Mm-hmm. So I haven't seen the show, but go ahead and tell us.
It's a good show, but it's fictional, but it has a real life depicting of, I guess one of the characters was a kid during the Tulsa massacre, and so in the show it shows this. So I just noticed online that a bunch of people were finding out about this for the first time, and I haven't known about it for a long time. That there was, and if you want to, you and Drew talked about it yesterday, so I don't know if you want to go into it more, but how are we not taught that?
Right.
And the thing is that was one of many, right? Like, there are many I still don't know about, the ones you talk about in your book that I had not heard of before. And you talk about lynchings. There is, here in Texas, it seems like you could, if you dig far enough, almost in every town, it seems like there was a lynching at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember. So one of the things we've done, one of the things we do here at Leadership Lanes, even when I think about the work we do with young people, is the girls that have been through our mentoring program the last couple of years. We've taken them at the end of that, near the end of that mentoring program, and what we call a leadership experience tour. And so part of the work and the reasoning behind that tour is to take them to a specific place, to say, okay, what was happening culturally, historically, socially in that place? And what leaders did God raise up in that place to respond to those challenges? And how does the response of those leaders and those communities of people inform your leadership today and the historical social challenges that you're facing? And so that's a conversation we've been having the last couple of years. And so last spring, we took them to Alabama. And one of the stops on the tour, was the Equal Justice Institute, which the Equal Justice Institute, they have the National Museum of Peace and Justice is the formal name of it. And there's also a memorial there, but the informal name is the Lynching Museum. And so if you go to the museum, which I highly encourage, you could just look it up on eji.org, eji.org. And the founder of that is Brian Stevenson, who wrote the New York Times bestseller, Just Mercy. And he's a lawyer by trade, and he spent all of his career really getting innocent people off of death row. And so, but this particular project that they've done in this lynching project is really partially to what they've done in Rwanda. Name the sin, right? That these people were murdered. A lot of them are now in unmarked graves, if they have a grave at all. And they were murdered for all. If I posted when I went to visit, there are markers there that said this person was lynched for saying, knocking on a white person's door. I mean, they were lynched for being Black. Right. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And they'll tell you the very specific reasons that these people were lynched all over the country. And so what they've done, they've collected these soil samples from the place after they've done the research and the history. They've laid these placards up in the museum or the monument at the memorial of the different counties where people have been lynched all across this country. And they're actually, each marker, they have two of them. And so one of the markers will always remain at the museum, but they're giving the various counties an opportunity to reclaim their marker. Is to say is if you come through this educational process of what, because they wanted to be a talking point, not just a artifact, right? They wanted to be a talking point and a point of learning for the entire community once the marker leaves the museum. And so it's like, you can reclaim your marker. There's a whole process for it. Actually, the community we live in now, I think they're one of the counties that are furthest along in reclaiming their marker from that memorial. But this whole point of these are things that most people don't even know, right? Folks, these are American citizens that have just been lynched in our country for really no reason at all, other than they were born in the wrong time and they were Black. That's it. Right. And they were able to be lynched. And there were people that were able to live and die in a ripe old age and raise their family and their children and progressing their careers and never were held accountable for those murders. And furthermore, these a lot of times we have pictures and stories of this, these were public spectacles, right? This is things that people did. They took pictures, they took their kids, they came in their Sunday best. Some of them went to church in the morning and went and lynched people in the afternoon. I mean, it's just a evil, I would name, of violence, right? That that the way that whiteness, the act of the power of it in our country has shown up in so many ways that's just been horrible and caused so many wilderness experience for people of color in our country.
Yeah, you talk about those pictures, the pictures of the lynchings that we see, and it's as if like families are going out to a night at the movies or something.
Picnic.
It's It's ghastly. Like, it's horrific.
Yeah.
Horrific.
And there are children in those pictures.
That's right. Right.
And people are like cheering, like they're smiling, like they're having a good time.
Yeah, like they're celebrating something. Yeah, it is horrific. And that's what I say. Like, when you really see truth for what it is, the logical, natural response is to be a little angry, at least a little angry, right? And to do something, right? To put that anger to good use.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I don't know what time are we have here?
Let me take a little break. Okay. So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna do a few announcements. I have some new announcements today, so you want to pay attention for those that are watching or watching right afterwards. We have some new announcements. So I'll take a few announcements, but if you have questions, if you want to engage with some specific content in the actual book, and you want us to answer those, Shane or I will be glad to do that. And if not, we have some other questions. We can continue the conversation for a few minutes. But let me take a minute for a commercial break, Shane, and share real quick. So for those who want to continue the conversation with us, I encourage you. So when I finished writing the book, I recorded a podcast to continue these conversations. So episode 6 and episode 7 are really about this portion of the book, The Wilderness. Amina Brown Owen is a spoken word artist and poet, but she was also with me on this trip to Rwanda. And so I had a conversation with her, and then I had a conversation with Florence Magisha, and she is the wife and one of the co-founders of Africa New Life, which is the ministry that we supported and partnered with in our trip to Rwanda. And so she can talk a little bit about the global experience and the wilderness that was in Rwanda and the work that they're doing now. And so a Sojourner's Truth podcast is what you will look up. A Sojourner's Truth podcast is what you will look up. And the podcast is available still on iTunes and on Spotify. And so we encourage you, if you want to continue the conversation and you're a podcast listener, to share that and to also listen to that. We'll be wrapping up the series discussion next week with my friend Ann Snyder, and we'll talk about redemption, because we will not be in the wilderness always, and we also know that we've been invited into some important kingdom work, and that gives us hope to continue as we journey through the wilderness. So we invite you to join us and continue the conversation in part 4 as we wrap up next time. Again, if you're registered on if you're joining us on Zoom, you've already registered, so you don't need to register again. But if you're on Facebook and you haven't registered, we encourage you to register and share the conversation with others. And then these are some new youth initiatives we have coming up in the fall. And so right now, we just announced our nationwide leadership essay contest. We were encouraged by becoming, and the conversation we had with the girls about becoming. And so we want to encourage anyone. This is for middle and high school girls. There's a cash reward for the essays. It's available now on our website. So if you go to the website, leadershiplinksinc.org, and look under leadership initiatives, there's an essay competition where it has all the instructions, the application, and anybody can enroll in that. You have until August 10th. And so we encourage you to share that. If you follow us on social media, we've already been sharing on social media, so you can share from either our Facebook page, our Twitter page, or our Instagram page as well. And then also, we are gearing up for our mentoring program for the 2020-2021 year. It's going to be virtual this year, obviously for safety reasons. And so we'll get that up in the next week or two. And so we want you to just be looking for that. If you have a middle school or high school girl, we start at 6th grade, that will be interested in joining our virtual mentoring program, we'll be sharing that with you. Again, we are a community that pray. Part of our mission is spiritual development. Our education, our leadership is for the part of that purpose is to facilitate that spiritual development. And one of the ways we do that with our entire network is to encourage prayer on the third Saturday of each month, the exact same time, the same dial-in information and access code. So we thank you to those of us who joined us last Saturday. And then if you want to join us on the 15th of August, that would be our next one. We're continuing with the work that we're doing with our young people, raising up the next generation of leaders. We're meeting with them every other week. We are encouraging them in their academic work. We're doing some supplemental funding for those who need tutoring throughout the summer. And again, we're getting ready to launch our mentoring program for the academic year. And so those are things we continue to do to enhance our core value of knowledge. And then those of you that have joined us either in last month's discussion or this one know that we were scheduled this summer to go on our first global leadership experience tour. So I was talking about our leadership experience tour just a little bit, but this was the first time we were going global. We were going to take a 12-day road trip to Canada and back, charting the Underground Railroad. And so obviously because of our current pandemic, we have had to postpone that, but our intention is, if everything works out, to reschedule that for next summer and to invite more of our girls to join. So if you're asking, what can we do? How can we support? One of the ways you can do that is to become a regular monthly donor to our organization. I'll share that with you, or just to send donations to the nonprofit to support initiatives like this one that are pretty financially costly. And then we want to encourage you to link up with us virtually. So if you haven't followed us on Facebook, to like our pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or we definitely want to encourage you to join, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We just started posting there. We will post this video there before the end of the week, as well as all the videos from the prior conversation that we had about becoming are there as well. And so we'll be posting more things to that YouTube channel. So we want people to subscribe. We need 100 people subscribing to that page so that we can customize that channel. So we want to do that. And then if you're interested in learning, being the first to know about important things like the essay competition and other things that we're doing, we want to definitely encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. So you can do that on our website. Just go to leadershiplinksinc.org, scroll to the bottom, hit subscribe to the newsletter, and then add our board secretary's email to your contact list, and to ensure when the newsletter comes that it's coming straight to your inbox and not getting stuck in your spam folder or your junk folder. Also, there are ways that you can volunteer with us. So one of our core values, the S in links, is service. And so we are looking for volunteers, whether you are interested in mentoring or just being a guest speaker or doing some other things. And we can tell you some of the needs that we have. We want to invite you to take 10 minutes, no more than 15, to fill out our volunteer application, which is available on our website. If you go to Service Opportunities tab, you can do that. And so we want to encourage you to do that as well. And these are some of the things we definitely need for the organization. If you have any of these skills, if you know someone that has any of these skills that would like to partner with us, to fill out that volunteer form and to put these things on there, we'll have someone on one of our committees to reach out to them. All right, so let's see if we have any questions that have come in. Let's see. All right, let's see. Did we see any questions? I don't see any. Oh, here we go. What books or resources do you recommend to educate myself about the evils of lynching? Whew, let's see. I would say, well, one thing I would say, definitely go to the Equal Justice Institute website. So if you go to eji.org, because they've done a full report on it. And when I printed the report out and started reading, it's kind of like a book. I mean, it's pretty thorough. And so I'm pretty sure you can download the PDF there. And the reason I say that is because there's several books I read that mention lynchings, but if you want to understand like the history of it and those things, that is specifically focused on the research of lynchings. And so that's why I would direct you to that. That's one of the questions that was there. We have some sharing here. about, you know, just some things they've been learning on the journey, Shane, about, you know, humility and building a new life in a new place, and how that kind of impacts their work. So one of the things I think is, let me ask you this, Shane, one question I have for you, and we have some time, so we can if any other questions come through, please feel free to share. If there are any questions on Facebook, share those questions as well. I'm gonna check real quick and we'll answer those, but we'll continue the conversation otherwise. One of the things I want to ask you, just in this theme of wilderness, how do you see this present wilderness shaping us, you know, shaping you, shaping us as humans in history, in light of some of the things that we're talking about tonight?
Wow, that's a big question. You know, I was telling somebody, especially closer to the more immediate aftermath of George Floyd's murder, and we started seeing all these protests and things, that it felt different, like the response felt different.
Initially.
Right. And I think I would imagine you probably felt the same way, but for people who've been engaged for a while, it was kind of like, why is this different?
Right.
You know, then all of the other you know, Black people we've seen murdered on screen, right?
Right.
Unarmed Black men, like why was this different? And you know, there, I guess, various reasons for that. So, you know, to be optimistic, I can say I'm glad that more people, whatever it was that woke people up, I'm glad. There are still protests going on across the country. We're having these conversations about policing that I feel like we've never really had before, that are getting prominence, you know. And to be pessimistic, yeah, there are some people who are bandwagoners, right? Like that are, it's super trendy to say that you agree with Black Lives Matter now. But I mean, all in all, I think the response is a good thing. Like I said, like we've had responses that we've never had before. And so one of the things that I said, just to answer your question, you know, how do I feel about this time in the wilderness? One of the things I said was, for the people who are just now kind of seeing it, is that like it's great to speak out on social media, and it's great to protest and write our politicians and our, you know, senators and congressmen and mayors. Like that's all really good, but the worst thing we could do is think that what this needed was for me to get on board and now it's going to fix something, right? Like now that I know about it, we're really going to fix something. And the truth is that this is like this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right?
Right.
And so if we burn bright, but burn out quick, that's no good. Like it's got to be, I think sustainable is what I'm looking for. Like the work has got to be sustainable, and knowing that you're signing up for this for life, that this isn't going to be a one and done thing. No one was waiting for you to get involved for this to get fixed. Yeah. So my hope is that it changes people for life and for the long haul, that they're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. And I think that's really good because, again, one of the things we've seen, right, is that sometimes when, and not just white people, because I saw this when I was doing a lot of anti-human trafficking work and advocacy, where people start finding out about it and they start wanting to do their own thing. And instead of supporting organizations that were already doing very important work and were under-resourced and needed more volunteers and needed more grassroots movements and things. And so I think this is the exact same thing of, first thing people want to do is like, okay, let me do something. And so part of that, I say spiritual work is, what spiritual disciplines and conversations are you having to sustain yourself on this work? And this is why, I wrote a book like A Sojourner's Truth, the way that I did, right? And having this spiritual reflection and stuff kind of behind it, because I know that it's hard, and I know that it's long, and I know it's a spiritual work as well. It's not just about physically showing up for something. It's about, how are we inspired and motivated, and what is the thing that's driving us to respond at all? And if we're not responding, what is naming that too, right? Like, what is that's causing us to be silent or to not move our feet? And so I think there's a spiritual element to it, but I think there's also this very real reality of an education and knowledge piece to it, that being on the journey means that we're getting more knowledgeable, we're becoming more aware. And so that's in the stuff that we read, and the leaders that we follow, and the leaders that we know, and organizations that we support, and the things that we align ourselves with. And in doing that, what we found, like, in a relationship, right, that you actually get authentic relationships with diverse people. It's not just like, how can I get me a white friend, or how can I get me a Black friend? Like, you are authentically engaging, and you have a mutual passion and purpose, and you're working together, and that is the thing that knits your heart together, and you can have a very authentic relationships in that way. And so the relationship element of it is important. The knowledge and education of it is important. The spiritual work is important. And then I say, then lastly, as those things are happening, like the physical ways that we show up, in the questions that we're asking, and things we prioritize. Because not all of us are called to the same things. I think, we have different responsibilities in this work of justice. And so to ask, okay, what is mine to do, is a very important question to ask. And that may change over time. And that may change as your life priorities change as well. And so that's very important. We do have a question from the audience. Now I saw, so Jennifer has a question. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for asking a question. So she says on page 139, there's a quote, if the racialized influence of legal institutions is a clearly defined enemy, then we must develop ways to defeat it. Could you recommend organizations or leaders doing this work we might support? Okay, I might stump in for EJI tonight because that's what they do, right? If we're looking specifically for a justice and legal side of things, that is exactly the work that they do. And they're a 501c3. So that's an organization that you can support financially. I don't think there's a lot of opportunities for volunteering with them. But let me see, what else? A legal institution that's clearly defined, we must develop ways to defeat it. I think another organization that's really good is World Relief is another great organization. They do important work for immigration reform and supporting refugees that are coming to this country. And they have lost a lot of money and have had to close several offices, and they're a Christian organization as a result of some of the immigration policies of our current administration. So World Relief is another organization that I would mention, because you're asking specifically about legal institutions. They're a more progressive organization. It would be like a Sojourners. They do some important work, and so they may or may not be an organization based on where you land theologically with things, but that's one that you should probably be aware of. Any other legal institutions that come to mind, Shane, that organizations that might be good? And then I'll name a few too that are not focusing in that regard. But go ahead.
You're talking specifically about immigration. Sorry, I can't see the question.
Oh, well, they were asking, they were quoting, I made a statement that if there are legal institutions, if there are the defined enemy, then we must develop ways to defeat it. So I was specifically, I guess, first responding to the question, because they said what organizations or leaders is doing this work that they could support. So I was responding first to some credible organizations that were doing I would say political, legal type work to address some of these issues that we've named tonight. So I wanted to name those first, but then I was going to consider some other organizations that we might name as well. But go ahead.
Yeah, I can't think of specifically any that do legal work. I know there are smaller nonprofits all over the country.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Some Googling could probably come up with some in your region or some that would be worthwhile. Yeah.
Right. So then some recommendations of organizations or leaders doing work. So any of this work that we might support. So, again, I think it's a matter of interest and passion, right? For example, I would say Leadership Links is an organization doing that work because the work we're doing is systemic. Like, we're investing long-term in people. We're not just doing events and programs. And so we have a very strategic way that we engage in that. And so I think that's very, very important. A lot of these people of color, particularly in children of color, going back to your example with schools, Shane, is that they don't have a support network to come around them to fill some of these gaps and stuff. And so that's a large part of what we do. So we do that here. I think if you're specifically talking about, racial conversations and those type things, where there's an organization called Lucretia Berry is someone I know and respect, and she has a organization, Brown City. I feel like it's something else after Brown City, but you can look up Brown City and Lucretia Berry, and then that'll pop up. That's one that's really intentional in providing education about racial dynamics and issues to get smart about. My friend Latasha Morrison, who went to Rwanda with me, has a ministry called Be the Bridge, and she's really intentional about getting people of color to engage in important conversations together. There's a wonderful Asian organization that just started, but even though the organization is new, the people that are leading it and supporting it are not new to this work. And I'm looking it up because there's a lot of alphabets. The Asian American Christian Collaborative is very, they started a few months back, but the people associated with that work are very, they're on mission. They're on mission. And so I think that's a really good organization to support leaders. Yeah, so I think that's a really good start. Obviously, some of you probably follow me already, but I have separate ministry work apart from the nonprofit work too, and so that's you can follow some of my ministry and social media pages. And I'm trying to think about obviously, like some of the people that's on here. Shane's podcast would be great. Drew Hart, who was here, his books and resources. InterVarsity Press, we've shared throughout this series that they have customized a bookstore for us, and InterVarsity Press is one of the publishers that has a strong history in producing credible resources on this topic. Credible Christian resources on this topic. And so there are some resources that we've already made available to you in our customized bookstore, which I think we shared the link already. If we haven't, we'll share it before the end of the night. And then we might have shared it early on, but there's a customized bookstore they provided. But if you go online to their website, they gave us a customized code where you can get a 40% discount on anything. So you could just pretty much search the topic of interest, and there are a lot of resources there. Okay, any other questions for me, Shane? We have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I really want to get in as much as I can.
Yes.
About that section. So let's talk about that last chapter in the section was entitled War. And so, I encounter people sometimes who feel like even like war vocabulary is like, we shouldn't use it because it's violent. But I really think when we engage in this type of work, when we're just have allegiance to Jesus, like I think the war metaphor is just the closest thing that makes sense to what's happening.
Yeah. It's was that a question, or you just setting me up?
I'm setting you up. That I think they call that a leading statement in the interview world. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously I'm theologically trained as well. I'm in a doctorate program right now. And so, especially in my master's program, we had a lot of conversation in our Christian ethics classes about, just war and whether it's important to be a pacifist. And obviously there are different people at different spectrums of that. Obviously I'm a veteran, so I've served in the military. And one thing I say, and I wrote about this in my first book, Mentor for Life as well, is that, so number one, the Bible is a very violent book, and because it's the reality of the nature of humans, and the societies that we lived in. And so you have a lot of violence happening even throughout the Old Testament. And when you look at any of these empires that show up, whether that be in Esther or Egypt in Exodus narrative or Rome in the majority of the New Testament, all of these empires maintain their power and influence and wealth because through the agency of violence. And so I'm not to say that that's God's way, it's to say that that's the reality and the backdrop that God has chosen to reveal his character and his story to us, right? And so I think when I think about my journey of war language and fighting and violence, what I understand is that my military training gives me a lens in which to see the Bible in a very particular way that people that have not had that training and don't know that language and are not thinking about strategy, tactics, and warfare and knowing not just yourself, but also your enemy, that it gives me an insight, I think, that some people don't have, right? And so I think it's important to name that. And I think it's also important to say, okay, now when we look at God's people responding in the Bible, in what ways are they responding in violent ways? And is that, because I think sometimes we're just looking at, is it right or is it wrong? But I think we have to have a little bit more layered conversation about what does it look like? Why is that happening? What is God, why is God responding? Or how is God responding in that way? How is God correcting it, right? And so I think that early on in my faith walk, it was easy to say, this is right and this is wrong, and this is good and this is evil. But what I understand now is that these things are so complex that most of the time, anything we define as war, there's probably a lot of good and a lot of bad on both sides. Right. And so for me, just to kind of take myself out of the conversation and say, I'm not going to have that conversation, I'm not going to use that language, I don't think it really helps at all. And it certainly doesn't allow us to engage the text with any level of integrity. And so I think that we need to lean into that discomfort and that tension and have some honest conversations about it rather than shying away from it. And and we see this, right? Like Paul is very intentional a lot of times in using very militarized language. I mean, that's what almost all of Ephesians 6 is about. He's talking about our spiritual struggle as a battle, that we're fighting against powers and principalities, and he's using armor, military armor, in the way that we prepare for that as a metaphor and as an imagery of a spiritual war and battle that's taking place. And I will say this probably lastly, is that what I know for sure is that spiritually we have a very real enemy, and the enemy is trying to destroy all of us. And we do not defeat that enemy by pretending he's not there, or it's the boogeyman, or or we just gonna play nice and be kind and love everybody and be fair, because that's not how that enemy plays with us. That's not how that enemy. And so I need a more intentional way to engage a spiritual realm that is intent on causing death and violence and destruction. And we've seen that, right? And that does not get solved by people doing nothing and just being kind and loving everybody, and not speaking out against that evil and that violence. And so I do think it's warfare, spiritual warfare, but I do also think we need to name the ways that spiritual warfare shows up in the physical.
Yeah, I think that's so good, Natasha. And you were good in the book to talk about, reminding us that our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? Like there are spiritual forces at work. And if, for me, I don't judge anybody who thinks about this differently, but for me as a Christian, it helps me make so much sense of this world to be able to say there are powers and principalities at work here. And that's why we're looking at all this. This is why why we see an unarmed Black man being murdered by people who are supposed to protect us. There are powers and principalities. And that also explains why some people are blind to it, can look at that and say, no, I don't see anything wrong with that, because there's a blindness there. There are powers and principalities that have something at stake in someone not seeing what's really going on there.
Yeah, I agree. And Sarah has done a wonderful work of typing up a lot of these recommendations. And Gary Hogden, yes, I read both at least one of these books. I think I know I have the other one here. So she's sharing. Actually, she got 3 books. I read Justice, Just Courage. I read The Locust Effect. I have Good News, but I haven't read Good News yet. And so she's provided us some great resources here to look into some other organizations as well, doing important work. And International Justice Mission is his organization. It's actually one of the organizations that my husband and I support. But yeah, Shane, one more question before we wrap up tonight. Do you have one more? Sure.
Anything for you.
One more question, and then we'll wrap up for the night.
Okay. You had the chapter on humility, and you had this great. You quoted it was, I guess, a spiritual director you had, and one of the lines that they wrote to you was, "Your only hope, Natasha, to remain a good steward, is to embrace your cross and take that downward path we so often talked about." And this is something I think about a lot, because I feel like for me as a white man, like I know what, or some of what it looks like for me to lay my life down for the people around me. Like it looks like, not always having the microphone and promoting people of color and letting them speak first, and deferring and resisting the narrative that society says that white dudes should be talking more, right? Yeah. But that's not what it looks like for you as a Black woman. So I'm curious what that looks like, that downward path, that laying your life down, what that call of Christ, basically, right? Yeah. To take up our cross. Like, what does that look like for you?
Well, I'm going to respond to that in 2 ways, and it's a good question. Thank you for it. I think one is, to throw back to your previous question of, this is one of the ways, again, where the military has given me perspective and insight, right? Because in John chapter 15, Jesus talks about this. It said, greater love has no person than this, and they will lay down their life for their friends. And we know, was not talking about that metaphorically, because he goes and does that very thing. And so laying down our life, counting the cost of our discipleship, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, it's not just about sacrifice and empathy and care and concern and posting on social media. It's like, literally, are you willing to lay down your life for someone? This is where military language comes in, right? Because that's what I took an oath to do. I took an oath to say, I am willing to die for a stranger, for the cause of my country, because I believe that's the right thing to do. And that's what the military taught me, right? That's what the military taught me. And then that's what Jesus taught me. And so this whole idea of us laying down our lives, at best in America, we see that as a discomfort. And we push back against it, right? So you tell somebody to wear their mask, and they say, well, that infringes on my personal right. that's not laying down your life. That's just a discomfort. That's an inconvenience, right? That's a not being selfish. And so, and you have plenty Christians that won't do a simple thing like that. And so if you won't do that, you certainly won't physically lay down your life. And so what I ask people a lot of times, and this is the real of it, right? When we talk about laying down our life, we say, okay, I got some sense of that. Okay, would you do for someone else what you would do for the very person that you love? Would I do for someone else's child what I would do for my own child? So the way this shows up in my life, one of the ways it shows up in my life is, like the work I do, for this nonprofit. Like early in my career, I had a career where I was making really good money, right? And so part of this, I have a whole chapter about this money and financial problem. I've laid down careers where I can make really good money, with the person with skill sets and the intellect and the character and the networks that I have, I could be making really good money. And I'm not, right? Because the work that I do is so much more important. It's one of the ways I lay down, like the work I do for this nonprofit. I don't get paid for my nonprofit work, and I do a lot of this work. And I was talking to one of my colleagues, one of our founding directors today. It's like, I don't do this nonprofit for my daughter. My daughter's going to be fine. I do this for other kids to have opportunities that my daughter is going to have, and to open up doors and access and opportunities for those other kids. And that's one of the ways I lay down my life, the time that I invest, the partnerships that I do, the collaborations that I make, so that when we go on a leadership experience tour, these children can go for cheap or for free because of those relationships that I'm leveraging, right? Because of the conversations that I'm having with people, because people may want me to show up for one thing, but if you invite me, then you have to invite my girls, right? And so those are different ways that I personally do that, but then I invite other people to do that as well. Right. And so I think that's why the important thing. And so if I were to go back to our core values, that's what's inspirational, right? That's what's inspirational. And that's how, to do like a historical throwback, that's how John Lewis has inspired me. That's how somebody like a C.T. Vivian has inspired me. To go back to my title of the book, that's how Sojourner Truth has inspired me, right? That's how a Harriet Tubman has inspired me to look at not just what's in my best interest, but what's going to be in the best interest of the community, right? And the people that I have the privilege of being in a relationship with, or in network with, or influencing. So I think that's a good place to leave everyone tonight. So let me thank you so much, my friend. Let me thank you for being with us. Thank you all for joining us in the conversation tonight. We are wrapping up next week, so we invite you to join us then. Check out Shane's podcast, Seminary Dropout. Shane is working on some writing things, so you can follow his website and find out more about that as well. And we also want to thank InterVarsity Press again for supporting us. And so I think we have included the link for our our customized bookstore with them. And so we should share that in the comment section, and you can dial in there. And then there's also a discount code. And there you go, Seminary Dropout. Thank you, Shane, for joining us. And so you can find him, I guess, on Spotify and iTunes. And Shane, is there somewhere else you're showing up on besides those two places?
Hopefully, wherever you get podcasts.
Well, wherever you get podcasts, go check him out, Seminary Dropout. I have, I think, 2 episodes there. And then, there in Drew Hart, who was with us last week, he's on there. And then some of these other people, I would say just search his podcast, because Shane has interviewed a lot of great people that I've listened to his interview to his podcast as well. And then we'll close tonight, like we close all of our events and programs, with our Leadership Links Creed. This reminds us of who we are as a people and as a community. And this is the community that you have been invited into tonight. And so our creed states that I am Leadership Links, part of a community founded on love, inspiration, network, knowledge, and service. I am never alone in this world. God has strategically placed me in the right place at the right time and connected me to the right people to fulfill the purpose He has for my life. Therefore, I will actively take part in the great work God is doing in the world. I promise to always stand, reach out and link up. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We've shared the discount for the Leadership Links. For the the Leadership Links customized bookstore with InterVarsity Press. Encourage you to go and purchase some resources there. And thank you, my friend Shane, for joining us tonight. And then we will wrap up our conversation next week, and we invite you to join us then. Thank you. Good night. Good night, all. Good night, Shane.
Good night. Thanks for letting me be a part of this.
Awesome. We'll share with you when we get done.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Sounds great. Bye.